Hello and welcome to the Day's Adventure podcast. This is episode 1 of the Woven and Curd series. I'm your host, David Visser, and I'm excited to guide you on this next extraordinary journey. This podcast is a personal voyage back in time, beginning in Groningen, Netherlands on October 31st, 1922. The day my grandfather was born. Through his eyes, we'll explore a world that has vanished, yet continues to shape who we are today. My grandfather was just 17 when World War II upheaved his life. His journal, written under the shadow of German occupation, offers a raw, unfiltered glimpse into those turbulent times. This journal came into my hands under heartfelt circumstances, handed to me on the day of my grandmother's funeral. It was a 120-page handwritten treasure in Dutch, brought back by my uncle and aunt after a trip to the Netherlands. The journey to bring his story to life has been anything but straightforward. Translating his journal proved to be a Herculean task, requiring patience and determination. For over a decade, it remained untouched in a fireproof box, waiting for the right moment to resurface. That moment is now. This podcast isn't just about recounting the past. It's about connecting the dots between history and humanity, finding echoes of my grandfather's resilience in our lives today. From the last democratic election before the German invasion to the liberation by Canadian and British forces, we'll explore how politics, society, and daily life intertwined during those defining years. Imagine being a teenager, witnessing your world change overnight. Through fear and hardship, my grandfather also found moments of joy, triumph, and humanity. His story captures not just historical events, but the essence of the human spirit. So let's turn back the clock together, not through the lens of a textbook, but through the words of a young man who lived it. From political shifts to personal battles, this journey promises to be as inspiring as it is illuminating. Before we dive into the journal's pages, I want to express my gratitude to those who have supported this project. Brenda, without you, this journey would have never started. To Sid and Toby's generosity in sharing the journal, my brother Danny and other family members that helped in gathering family insights, all played a pivotal role in bringing this story to life. This episode will explore the journey of translating my grandfather's journal, uncovering intriguing family struggles, and painting a vivid picture of life in the Netherlands in 1937. From the political atmosphere to the rich history of the area, we'll dive into the context that shaped the world my grandfather had experienced. Stay tuned as we weave together a narrative that blends the personal and the historical, the ordinary and the extraordinary. Welcome to the Day's Adventure. The journey starts now. December 26, 2023, Boxing Day. It was a relaxing day, the kind where you can just sit back, sip on coffee, and let the world unfold at its own pace. I had my subscription to the New York Times, reading through news headlines, when an article caught my eye. It detailed how ChatGPT had helped decode an ancient Egyptian text that had stumped historians for centuries. The piece, published in Nature, described how this revolutionary AI technology brought new life to a text that had remained an enigma for decades. The article explained that researchers used ChatGPT to analyze the linguistic structure of the text, piecing together meaning where traditional methods had fallen short. It wasn't just about the words, it was about uncovering a lost story, a slice of history, through modern technology. One detail that struck me was how AI could bridge the gap between ancient languages and modern understanding, offering a level of nuance that was previously unattainable. As I read, something clicked, a light bulb moment. For over a decade, my grandfather's journal had been sitting in a fireproof box untouched, its handwritten account penned in Dutch during the 1940s. Translating it had always seemed like an insurmountable task. The handwriting, the nuance of the language, and the sheer emotional weight of his words. That article sparked an idea. If AI could decode ancient Egyptian texts, what could it do for my grandfather's journal? I dove in. I researched translation methods, studied linguistic accuracy, and explored historical Dutch idioms. The work required a blend of AI tools, a Dutch-speaking friend, and deep research into cultural and historical contexts of the 1940s. The translation process was layered, meticulous, and at times overwhelming. But then, finally, the words emerged. For the first time in decades, the voice of my grandfather came alive. His thoughts, his observations, his experiences, all in his own words, written during one of the most turbulent times in history. Reading those pages was nothing short of incredible. My grandfather, who I've always remembered as a strong, stoic figure and had a profound influence on my life, was suddenly alive again through his words. The journal wasn't just a document, it was a bridge to a man who had shaped my life in ways I'm still discovering today. I embarked on the meticulous journey of translating page after page of my grandfather's journal. It wasn't just about converting words, it was about ensuring the heart of his experiences remained intact. Growing up, I was raised by my grandparents, who had immigrated to Canada in the 1950s. Though I was deeply immersed in Dutch culture, I never learned the language beyond a handful of phrases and elementary understanding. This made the translation process both a challenge and deeply personal. Translating from old handwritten Dutch into English was no small feat. The language of the 1940s is filled with idioms and expressions that often held cultural or situational meanings, especially during a time of war. Words that would seem straightforward often required deeper investigation to understand their full significance. For example, phrases tied to the German occupation or the struggles of daily life during the war carried weight that could easily be lost in direct translation. The process was long and layered. The process also included AI tools, digital enhancement, a Dutch fluent friend, and historical research. I cross-referenced each sentence, delving into research on historical and cultural nuances to uncover the meanings behind certain wartime references or local idioms that I might not have fully understood. Each entry brought me closer to my grandfather's world. His thoughts, observations, and experiences came alive in a way that felt like time travel. It was as if his words were a bridge connecting me not only to the past, but also to the man who had been such a powerful influence in my life. The anticipation of revealing these stories was immense. This process wasn't just about translating that journal. It was about forging a connection across generations. My grandfather's experiences, once locked in the faded ink, are now vivid stories that live on, not only within me, but also with the audience I share them with. Through this journey, I've come to appreciate not just his resilience and spirit, but also the profound impact of understanding one's roots. As I piece together the fragments of my grandfather's journal, I realized that his story didn't just begin with the words he wrote, it began in the world he was living in. To truly understand his perspective, we need to step back in time to the events and circumstances that shaped his life before he ever picked up a pen. This journey takes us to April 1937, a pivotal moment in the Netherlands. It was the last democratic election before the German invasion, a time when the nation's political landscape was shifting under the weight of rising global tensions. Understanding this context is essential to grasp the significance of my grandfather's experiences. It paints a vivid picture of the world he lived in, a world on the brink of extraordinary change. Let's step back to 1937, where the story begins. Europe 1937 was not an isolated arena of upheaval. It was part of a world grappling with political, social, and economic tensions that would soon ignite the flames of World War II. Across continents, ideological battles and shifting powers created a sense of unease, as if the world was teetering on the edge of something immense. In Spain, the bloody Spanish Civil War raged on, dividing the nation between Francisco Franco's fascist forces and a coalition of Spanish Republicans. The German Luftwaffe's bombing of Groningen that year became a symbol of the horrors of modern warfare, a chilling prelude to what lay ahead. In East Asia, the Second Sino-Japanese War erupted, with Japan's invasion of China marking a turning point in the region's geopolitics. The Marco Polo Bridge incident in July of 1937 was the spark leading to a widespread conflict that would devastate millions and intertwine with the global war to come. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Great Depression continued to cast a long shadow over the economy, despite President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal efforts. The world was still recovering from the economic turmoil of the pandemic and the economic fallout of the 1920s and the 1930s. And for many nations, recovery was uneven, fragile, and a source of mounting tensions. Against this backdrop of global unrest, the Netherlands in 1937 reflected these broader dynamics. The political scene was tense and fraught with ideological battles. Anton Mozart, the leader of the NSB, or Dutch Nazi Party, sought to capitalize on the growing tide of fascism in Europe. Having established the Dutch Nazi Party in 1932, he aimed to expand its influence. Despite his ambitions, the Dutch people resisted. The 1937 general election was a testament to the resilience of the Dutch democracy. The Roman Catholic State Party emerged as the most popular, securing 28% of the vote, followed by the Social Democratic Workers' Party with 21%, and the Anti-Revolutionary Party, a conservative Protestant Christian reform group, with 16%. The NSB, Mozart's party, saw its support dwindle, capturing only 4% of the vote versus 8% in the previous election, a clear rejection of the extremist ideology spreading across Europe. This election offered a brief moment of collective relief and a stand for democratic values in uncertain times. The Dutch people had made their voices heard, resisting the allure of fascism even as their neighbors in Germany and elsewhere succumbed to authoritarian regimes. But beneath the surface of this democratic resilience, tension brewed. The shadow of Nazi Germany loomed large, and the winds of war were beginning to stir. For the Netherlands, 1937 wasn't just another year, it was a fragile pause before the storm. It's within this complex and precarious landscape that my grandfather's story begins. To understand his perspectives and experiences, we need to see the world as he did, a teenager, growing up in a country at the crossroads of hope and fear, democracy and dictatorship. Let's delve deeper into life in the Netherlands during this time, exploring the culture, society, politics, and the daily routines that defined an era on the brink of extraordinary change. To truly understand my grandfather's experiences, we need to step into the world he grew up in, the Netherlands of 1937, and specifically the city and province of Groningen. Known for its flat landscapes crisscrossed by canals, Groningen was the hub of agricultural productivity and trade. It was a place where tradition and innovation often intertwined, shaping both the culture and the people. The Netherlands in the 1930s was progressive in many ways, especially when it compared to other parts of the world. For example, Dutch men and women had the right to vote when they turned 25, a significant step forward in gender equality at the time when many nations still restricted women's suffrage. The Netherlands had embraced women's rights to vote in 1919, decades before countries like France and Switzerland. This early adoption of gender equality in voting reflected the country's broader commitment to democratic values and human rights. The labor market was another area where the Netherlands stood out. While the country was still grappling with the economic challenges of the Great Depression, labor conditions were comparatively progressive. Workers' rights were enshrined in law, and trade unions played an essential role in advocating for fair wages and working conditions. Groningen, in particular, had a strong tradition of labor organization, with many workers engaged in shipbuilding and trade-related industries like agriculture. Unlike in Canada and other parts of the world, where industrial disputes often led to violent clashes, the Dutch labor movement worked within a more legal structured framework, resulting in fewer confrontations and a greater emphasis on dialogue. In Groningen, the agricultural sector dominated daily life. Farmers worked long hours cultivating crops like potatoes, sugar beets, and grains, while livestock farming provided milk, cheese, and meat for the local and national markets. However, urban areas like the city of Groningen became increasingly industrialized. Factories, shipyards, and workshops offered employment to a growing population, while the port facilitated trade with other parts of Europe. Daily life in the 1930s Netherlands was a mix of hard work and simple pleasures. Families often gathered around the radio, which had become a popular source of news and entertainment. Cycling was a way of life. Bicycles were not only a practical mode of transportation, but also a symbol of Dutch culture. In the evenings, young people socialized in church groups or local cafes, while older generations found community in traditional activities like fishing and gardening. Education played a central role in shaping the future of Dutch society. While secondary education wasn't universal, children often attended primary school until the age of 14. Those who pursued education were typically preparing for careers in fields like teaching, engineering, or administration. For those who didn't, vocational training provided practical skills that would serve them well in agriculture and industry. In terms of social norms, The Dutch were deeply influenced by the Calvinistic and Catholic traditions, which emphasized community, hard work, and responsibility. This foundation of shared values fostered a sense of resilience and solidarity, even during challenging times. The city of Groningen itself was a vibrant blend of historical charm and modernity. Its central market, the Groot Market, bustled with activity, hosting stalls selling fresh produce, textiles, and household goods. The Merotroon, a medieval church tower, stood as a symbol of the city's rich history, while the nearby canals added to its picturesque beauty. For my grandfather, growing up in this environment meant being shaped by a culture that valued democracy, progress, and community. Yet, as the shadow of war crept closer, these ideals were put to the test. It was a world of contrast, prosperity and hardship, tradition and change, peace and looming conflict. Understanding this vibrant yet fragile world is a key to grasping the depths of my grandfather's journal. It wasn't just a record of events, it was a reflection of a society navigating the complexities of the 20th century with resilience and determination. From the progressive labor rights to the strong community ties, the Netherlands in 1937 stood as a testament to what could be achieved through democratic values and social cohesion. By 1937, the Netherlands seemed to stand as a bastion of democracy and resilience amidst a world increasingly gripped by turmoil. Yet the storm clouds of war were gathering, and no nation could remain untouched for long. As we move forward in this story, it's important to recognize how the events unfolding beyond the Dutch borders would soon ripple through my grandfather's life and the lives of millions. Europe in the late 1930s was a continent on edge. Germany, under Adolf Hitler's leadership, was rearming and expanding its military in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The Nuremberg laws, enacted just 2 years prior, institutionalized radical discrimination against Jews, foreshadowing the horrors that were to come. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist regime tightened its grip, and his alliance with Hitler signaled a dangerous consolidation of power. Closer to the Netherlands, Belgium and France watched nervously as Germany's ambitions became clearer. Meanwhile, Britain pursued a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid another catastrophic conflict. This fragile balance of power gave way to an uneasy tension as nations braced themselves for what felt inevitable. For the Dutch, neutrality was a cornerstone of their foreign policy. Having stayed out of World War I, the Netherlands hoped to repeat that success by maintaining a position of impartiality. But the German military machine grew stronger. Many began to question whether neutrality would be enough to shield the country from the coming storm. This geopolitical tension wasn't just felt at the national level. It trickled down into everyday life. Families gathered around radios to hear updates on international events, and newspapers reported on the escalating conflict in Spain, the Japanese invasion of China, and Hitler's annexation of Austria, which would come in the following year. For a teenager like my grandfather, these events would have been both distant and deeply concerning, a backdrop to a life still filled with school, family, and dreams for the future. By the late 1930s, Nazi propaganda had infiltrated Dutch society, attempting to sway public opinion. Some were drawn in, but the majority of Dutch citizens resisted. Labor unions, religious groups, and political parties all worked to uphold the democratic values. The question on everybody's mind, though, was whether the government could maintain its course in an increasingly unstable world. But in the province of Groningen, life continued as it always had. But even there, the signs of change were evident. The labor strikes of earlier years had subsided, but economic recovery remained fragile. Farmers worried about the market prices and trade, while industrial workers kept an eye on the political developments that would disrupt their livelihoods. And in every household, the unspoken question lingered: how long could peace last? For my grandfather, these formative years were a mix of routine and uncertainty. As he attended school and helped with family responsibilities, the world around him shifted in ways that were impossible to ignore. It's in this context, on the cusp of profound change, that his journal begins to take shape. But before he could put pen to paper, the foundations of his world were about to be shaken. The events of 1937 were just a prelude. By the time the 1940s arrived, the Netherlands would find itself at the center of one of history's most devastating conflicts. And for my grandfather, the experience that would define his journal and his life were about to begin. In our next episode, we'll explore the eve of war, the political social landscape, and the invasion of the Netherlands in May 1940, and its impact on everyday life in Groningen. We'll dive into the initial shock, the fear, and the uncertainty, and the ways in which communities banded together to adapt and resist. It's a story of resilience, courage, and the strength of the human spirit, a story that continues to resonate today. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Through the lens of my grandfather's journal, we'll continue to uncover the personal and historical threads that connect us to a past that still shapes our present. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop chasing that next great adventure. The world is full of wonders, and your next journey is just one episode away. That's it for this episode of The Day's Adventure. Remember, stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop chasing the next great adventure. The world is full of wonders, and your next journey is just one episode away. To keep the adventure alive, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video versions and exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Want more? Hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss the next thrilling episode. The world's waiting. See you next time on The Day's Adventure.